Learning for me is entirely about behaviour change.
Organisations are changing, the world is changing, the demographics are changing, who we trade with is changing.
I think hiring for potential is like a bit of a misnomer of, or just an alternative way of saying hiring the right people.
These are all learning curves and insights that you take on board to try and think about what you implement in.
You know, I entered the world of work without any assumptions that there would be barriers because of my gender.
Hi, and welcome to the Women in Leadership podcast series brought to you by the Business Transformation Network. It's commonly acknowledged that diversity initiatives improve business outcomes, yet still in 2020, only 29% of senior leadership roles were held by women. This series looks at women in leadership, the more personal aspects of their professional experience, what businesses need to recognise and do today to create a more diverse tomorrow, and much more. As always, if you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe and leave a review, and all links from the conversation will be shared in the show notes on whichever app you listen to your podcasts on. So let's go ahead and get started. This episode is in partnership with Coach Hub. Coach Hub is the digital coaching platform and enables personalised coaching for employees of all career levels. Coach Hub's vision is a personal coach for every employee, regardless of their career level. You can watch the full series at the btn.tv or coachhub.io. Let's go ahead and get started. Today with us, we have Sharon Clews, Interim Director of Learning and Organisational Development at Warner Media, who will be discussing accelerating women in leadership whilst looking at the role of coaching in development. This interview was part of a video series in partnership with Coach Hub. I hope you enjoy. Hi Sharon, could you please introduce yourself and what you do for our listeners?
Hi, I'm Sharon Clews. I am currently the Interim Director of Learning and Organisational Development at Warner Brothers. And I have been working in leadership development, learning and organisational effectiveness for probably the last 5-6 years.
Amazing. So starting us off, what would you say are the most important skills that you feel are necessary for women to be successful in business today?
It's about confidence, and that's probably the first one. And the second one for me is self-love. I see plenty of women who are not confident and who really don't rate themselves, don't like themselves, and I think as a result of that get a little bit of the imposter syndrome going. In my experience, that imposter syndrome actually starts with being comfortable and confident around who you are and how you portray yourself as well. So I think those skills are vital, and also we could do with a lot more of the self-love stuff, right? Because there's just not enough of it. But I also think some of the great natural skills that women have, we are really fabulous at networking. We without being gender biased at all, there's a significant difference between conversations that men have with people and that women have with people. I think women can naturally ask a lot more questions. They become more attuned to what's happening, and I think some of that's empathy. I think some of those skills are definitely being vulnerable. I think there's probably a little bit less ego involved with women who are genuinely empathetic and vulnerable, not in comparison to men, by the way. This is just about my experience of successful women, and I think women who are really good at networking, it's one of the most undermined skills, and I think it is an undermined skill because it doesn't necessarily get done very well. I think there's always it feels like that there's an objective to networking, when in fact it should just be about how many people you can connect with or how many other people you can connect via your network. I don't like to think of it as, what am I going to get out of this at the end? This is no, I don't know that person. Perhaps I could be a little bit more curious, or perhaps somebody could introduce me. it's not about getting something out of it, I don't think, initially. It is genuinely about who you know, how well connected you are. And then ultimately it will be how well you use those networks and those connections. And I think the other two kind of more definite skills are around assertiveness and negotiation. And they're all tied in initially, obviously, with that confidence part at the beginning. But I definitely think being able to be assertive in the way that you speak, and assertive in the way that your body language is, assertive in what it is that you want to do without making any apologies to that, is really, really important. And also just the art of negotiation, being able to negotiate with people around terms, around what your boundaries are. A lot of women I know don't have a lot of those boundaries and tend to try and do the multitasking, and yes, I can say yes to everybody. And yeah, in my experience, we can't do that forever.
Mm. And why do you think female leaders have been doing so well currently?
There is plenty of science out there that just says that we have very different brains, male, female brains. And the vulnerability and empathy and compassion, I think, are two of the strongest mothering, nurturing tools that we're given, whether we use them or not in that particular way. They enable people to expose enough of ourselves so that we feel connected to somebody else. There's always something that will happen to somebody else that we can relate to and that we can understand. Always. There's my experience has never been, I've got nothing, from an empathetic perspective. And if we start thinking and leading with compassion, in that we start with the other person first. So what experience is this person having? If we're going into a feedback meeting, where are they right now? Have they been in a difficult situation? Have they had a tough commute in? Have they had a horrible weekend? Being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and understand how a piece of information will be received, I think is absolutely critical. And I do think that's why, there's no coincidence. I think it was a Forbes or a Harvard article recently which said, why have these countries all done better out of the COVID-19 responses? Because they've had female leaders. That isn't always the case. That's not, there are some countries obviously that have done well with male leadership, but, and everybody will cite the examples, Jacinda Ardern, during the horrible attack that was in New Zealand, the beginning of last year, I think that was, where she literally went and had compassion and empathy and vulnerability with people she didn't know. And I think and I've only actually discovered this recently, that I believe one of the things that enables you to have compassion and vulnerability and empathy is trust. And I think I have this thing which I coined as, the IP is the PI, which for me is the ingoing premise is positive intent. And if I go and have a conversation with you, I will trust you implicitly until you disprove me otherwise. And I think that the power that those women have with positive track records, and not just about vulnerability and responsibility, that they trust that it will be okay to put themselves out there. And that's why they get so much back.
Mm-hmm. And how has your organisation continued the development of leaders during the COVID-19 pandemic?
It's really interesting at Warner Brothers, and obviously, my disclaimer here is that I am an interim. I've been there a short period of time. I don't speak on behalf of them. My experience has been really interesting in being there, which has all been positive, and particularly positive. Warner Brothers run something called Women of Warner, which at the moment is highlighting, I think it's weekly, how women have gotten into film and television, because again, traditionally not a standard female path. And so they're having sessions around Q&As with these people. This is my journey. And those women obviously have a good reputation and a really strong skill base, but they're probably women that haven't been asked to do that previously. I think the Women of Warner group always focuses on, on women who are role models, but who are also accessible, so that they can answer questions about, how did you get here and what did that look like? And some of those journeys are really interesting because they are journeys that you don't think start that way. I think a lot of women think that to be in the boardroom or to be a CEO or, or even an NED, you have to have a strategic route, and it has to be a quite linear path. And yeah, my experience is that that's not always the case.
Interesting. And so where does coaching, and more specifically digital coaching, fall into your learning and development initiatives?
Yes, there's a real platform for it. There's a real need for it, and there's a real competitive market. If you have a look at how many online coaching platforms there are, plenty. The other side to that is that I am currently completing my coaching qualification and doing plenty of online coaching, to the point where I kind of think, now why would I need to go and sit with somebody in a room and have a coaching conversation? I've had plenty of experience coaching both within learning and development programs as in-program coach, or coaching people who used to work for me, coaching as a leader in a team, coaching. That's just it's been all around me for a long time. I think the skills, much like we talked about the skills before around empathy and vulnerability, I think they translate. I think it's just as easy to be able to have those conversations with someone across a screen than across a room. I think there's a real, I think smart organizations who are developing their people to have these skills of empathy and vulnerability in the way that they lead are going to have to invest in coaching them. It's very difficult to be able to provide a training program or a course that says to people, you've got to be an empathetic leader and here's how you do it. There's a real connection with coaching around how you do that, and around questioning people and allowing them time to process those questions and allowing them time to think. In my experience, there's a very, very strong trust between coach and coachee. Doesn't matter how that comes across, whether it's in the same room or not. And there is a significant space that you need to focus on holding for that person. These are, they are being vulnerable. My goodness, that's the most vulnerable anyone's ever going to be in coaching and in therapy, and it's our job to be able to hold that space for people. And when I think about the feedback that we've received, not just at Warner, my previous roles within M&G and Prudential, what feedback we used to get was, I wish we had more time to reflect on the learning that we provided as people. A lot of people kind of think, that's a hell of a lot of information, how do I take it all in? From when you're in a one-to-one coaching situation, even as in-program coaches, to be able to allow somebody the luxury of having a conversation that says, what did you get out of that? What did you think about that? How did that make you feel? That vulnerability stuff. My experience is that the learning is much deeper and more greatly embedded.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We hope it gave you a little more insight into what it means to be a female leader today. For more content like this, please subscribe to the BTN website, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating conversation. Thanks.